Ever wished you could turn that spare room into an extra income stream?
Or maybe you have a whole property just sitting there.
Well, today we're going deep on Airbnb.
Specifically for those of you thinking, hey, I could host.
We found this awesome article on Investopedia.
And we're going to break it all down.
From the basics to the stuff they don't put in the ads.
You know, it's interesting.
What's that?
Airbnb's come a long way from the early days.
You mean back when it was just air mattresses on the floor?
Exactly.
Now it's a huge publicly traded company.
Global reach, we're talking.
Huge. How big are we talking?
7 million listings
Wow.
in over 100,000 cities.
That's incredible. It really has changed the whole travel industry.
Yeah, but what I find even more fascinating
Yeah.
is how it's created this whole new way for people to make money.
Everyday people like us.
Absolutely. And they were even trying out these Airbnb experiences.
Before the pandemic hit.
Things like cooking classes with locals or guided tours.
Oh,
Shows you how ambitious they are.
Yeah, always pushing the boundary.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get down to it.
What do you mean?
What are the first steps our listeners need to take if they want to become hosts?
Well, before you even think about taking those perfect listing photos,
Right.
you've got to do your homework.
Oh, so we're not just throwing up a listing and hoping for the best.
Not quite. I'm talking about the legal stuff.
Oh, there's legal stuff to think about.
You bet. Your city might have strict rules about short-term rentals.
Oh, like what kind of rules?
Like how many days you can rent out a place,
Okay.
whether you need to live there yourself, or even if you need a special permit.
You're kidding.
Nope. If you ignore those local regulations,
What could happen?
you could get in a lot of trouble.
Yikes. Okay, point taken.
Yeah, it's important.
So where do we even start with figuring all that out?
The Investopedia article recommends checking your city's website
Okay,
for any rules about short-term rentals.
makes sense.
They usually have a whole section on zoning and land use regulations. Airbnb also has a whole section on their website for hosts,
I bet they do.
outlining their own rules and requirements.
So we have to be familiar with both.
Yep, both the cities and Airbnbs.
Got it. So once we've got the legal stuff sorted,
Yeah,
then can we finally break out the camera and stage the perfect living room shot?
almost.
Almost.
But before you start creating your online oasis,
Okay.
think about this. What kind of host do you want to be?
What do you mean?
Are you aiming for superhost status?
Superhost, what's that?
It's like the gold standard for Airbnb hosts.
And
You get a special badge on your listing,
I bet that helps.
which can attract more bookings,
Right.
and you get access to extra perks and support from Airbnb.
So it's worth going for.
It is, but it's not just handed to you.
Also, how do we reach superhost nirvana?
Not quite nirvana, but there are specific criteria you need to meet.
Like what?
Mainly around guest satisfaction,
Makes sense.
response times, and commitment to hosting.
Ah, so you really have to be dedicated.
Yeah, and here's where it gets interesting.
Oh, I love interesting. What is it?
Airbnb has these superhost ambassadors,
The ambassador.
experienced hosts who mentor and guide new hosts.
So they have like Airbnb gurus you could just call up for advice?
Exactly. They can help you craft the perfect listing,
Okay.
set competitive prices,
Hmm.
and even navigate tricky situations with guests.
That's pretty cool, especially if you're just starting out.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
So we've done our legal due diligence,
Mm-hmm.
figured out what kind of host we want to be,
Right.
and maybe even gotten some advice from a superhost ambassador.
Sounds like you're ready.
Are we ready to roll?
Not quite yet.
Oh, come on. What else is there?
We haven't talked about the financial side of Airbnb.
Oh, right. Money.
And trust me, it's more nuanced than you might think. Okay, so let's break it down.
The finances.
Yeah, the money stuff.
Okay, so we all know Airbnb takes a cut,
Right.
but how much are we actually talking about?
Well, for hosts, it's usually around 3% of each booking. Yep, which might not sound like much.
Sure.
But let's say you're renting out a spare room for $100 a night.
Right.
That's $3 going to Airbnb right there.
Okay, so it's a percentage-based fee.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But what about the guests?
Yeah, what about them?
How much extra are they paying on top of the listed price?
For guests, it can be a bit higher,
How much higher?
up to 14.2%.
Whoa, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, but here's where it gets a little more complex.
Oh, I knew there had to be a catch.
Airbnb has this other payment structure for certain listings,
Oh, really? Like what?
like hotels, for example,
Okay.
where the host covers the whole service fee.
Interesting.
Yeah, so in those cases, guests might actually be paying a higher price overall.
But hey, even with those fees, Airbnb can still be cheaper than a traditional hotel, right?
Often, yes.
Especially if you have a whole property to rent out.
Exactly. The Investopedia article actually gives some examples where Airbnb comes out way cheaper.
Than comparable hotels.
Yep. Plus, think about all the value you're offering guests.
True, you get a full kitchen, maybe a laundry room, even outdoor space.
Things you wouldn't get in a standard hotel room.
And let's not forget the flexibility for hosts.
Absolutely.
You set your own prices, choose your own availability, and even lay down some house rules.
It's like running your own mini hotel.
But with your own personal touch.
Exactly. And that control can be a huge draw for people.
Yeah, if you want to leverage your property on your own terms.
Precisely. But let's be realistic.
Okay.
There are two sides to every coin. Hosting on Airbnb isn't all sunshine and roses.
You mean there are downsides?
Well, yeah, there are some challenges.
Don't leave us hanging. What kind of challenges?
Well, the big one that keeps a lot of people up at night is the risk of property damage.
Oh, guests aren't always as careful as we'd like them to be.
Exactly. A spilled glass of wine on the rug.
Oh, no.
A scratch on the hardwood floor.
I've been there.
These things happen.
So how do we protect ourselves against those nightmare scenarios?
Well, fortunately, Airbnb offers a program called Air Cover for hosts.
Air cover.
It includes things like guest identity verification and damage protection.
That sounds pretty comprehensive.
It's not a foolproof system, but it does offer a level of security.
And peace of mind.
For sure. So that takes care of the potential financial hit from a clumsy guest.
Right. But what about those horror stories you hear about truly terrible guests?
Like the partiers,
the rule breakers.
the ones who leave the place looking like a disaster zone.
Yeah, those are definitely valid concerns.
And while Airbnb does have policies in place for dealing with those kinds of guests,
Okay.
it's still a headache you might have to deal with as a host.
So it's a balancing act, right?
It is.
Weighing the potential risks against the potential rewards.
Exactly. You've got to decide what level of risk you're comfortable with
Yeah.
and take steps to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Like what kind of steps?
That might mean setting clear house rules, being upfront about expectations,
Yeah.
or even being selective about who you rent to.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal stuff, the financial side, and even the potential pitfalls of hosting.
Right.
But let's not forget about the bigger picture.
What do you mean?
How has Airbnb impacted the world beyond just giving people a place to stay?
That's a great question.
I thought so.
Airbnb is a prime example of the sharing economy in action.
In action. How so?
It's not just about travel.
It's not.
It's about people leveraging their assets to create income.
And their assets in this case are their properties.
Exactly. And participating in a new kind of marketplace.
It's almost like a cultural shift, right? The idea of opening up your home to strangers, building trust through a platform like Airbnb.
It is pretty remarkable.
And on a local level, Airbnb has injected money into communities.
Absolutely. Often in areas that haven't traditionally benefited from tourism.
Yeah, so it's created jobs.
Yep. Boosted local businesses.
And even revitalized struggling neighborhoods.
It has, but it's not all sunshine and roses.
What do you mean?
There's been some pushback against Airbnb.
Pushback? Like what?
Concerns about its impact on housing markets and competition with traditional hotels.
Oh, right. So some cities have seen rents skyrocket.
They have, as landlords, convert long-term rentals into short-term Airbnb listings.
Making it even tougher for people to find affordable housing.
Exactly. And of course, the hotel industry isn't thrilled about this new competitor.
So there are definitely trade-offs to consider.
There are.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
That's true.
But isn't that true of any disruptive innovation?
What do you mean?
It shakes things up, creates new possibilities, but also presents new challenges.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Okay.
Navigating the complexities and ultimately deciding whether Airbnb aligns with your values and goals.
Well said. Now let's get into some key insights from the Investopedia article.
Okay.
These are the things that might surprise our listeners.
All right.
Nuggets of knowledge that can really make a difference when you're making decisions about Airbnb as a host. All right, let's get into some of those finer details. Because I know a lot of our listeners are probably wondering,
Yeah, what are they wondering?
is Airbnb really cheaper than a hotel?
The age-old question.
Right. Or is that just marketing hype?
Well, the Investopedia article actually backs that up.
It does.
In many cases,
Okay.
Airbnb can be significantly more affordable,
Than comparable hotels.
especially for those of you with more space to rent out.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. Hosts aren't paying for fancy lobbies, 247 room service, or
Oh.
those tiny bottles of shampoo.
Okay, so you're providing the essentials,
Exactly.
but you're not trying to be the Ritz-Carlton.
Not at all. And for guests, especially families or groups,
Yeah.
that translates to more space for their money
Right. A whole apartment or house
versus a cramped hotel room.
can make a huge difference.
We can.
Speaking of space,
Yeah.
what if someone wants to stay for a longer period?
Oh, you mean long-term stays?
Yeah, is Airbnb just for short trips?
That doesn't have to be.
Really? So you can actually book for weeks or even months at a time?
You'd be surprised how many people are using Airbnb for longer stays.
Wow.
Some hosts cater specifically to that market.
Interesting.
And Airbnb even has policies in place for those types of bookings.
So theoretically, you could ditch your apartment lease
You could!
and just live the nomadic Airbnb life.
Hopping from one cool location to the next.
Exactly.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
Though I definitely recommend reading the fine print on those long-term stay policies
Of course, always read the fine print.
before you make any drastic life changes.
Now, let's talk about something that can be a bit stressful for both hosts and guests.
Oh, what's that?
Cancellations.
Ah, yes. Cancellation.
What's the deal with Airbnb's cancellation policies?
Well, are they standardized or is it a free-for-all? I'm not sure. Tell me. Here's the thing. Airbnb gives hosts a lot of flexibility in setting their own cancellation rules.
Oh, interesting.
Some are super lenient, offering full refunds up to a certain point,
Right.
while others are stricter, maybe only offering partial refunds or even no refunds at all.
So it's kind of like the Wild West of cancellations.
It can be.
Guests really need to pay close attention to those policies before they book.
Absolutely. Don't just assume it's a standard policy across the board.
Right.
Always read the cancellation terms carefully before you hit that confirm button.
And for our hosts out there,
Yes.
setting a clear and fair cancellation policy is crucial.
It is. It can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
All right, so before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me.
The rise of platforms like Airbnb really begs the question, are we witnessing a fundamental shift in how we think about travel and accommodation?
That's a great question. Are traditional hotels going to become a thing of the past?
Right. Or will they adapt and coexist with these new models?
And what about the impact on communities?
Yeah. Will platforms like Airbnb help to revitalize struggling areas?
Or will they exacerbate existing problems like affordable housing shortages?
So many questions.
I know.
And honestly, no easy answers.
Not really, but that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It's dynamic, it's evolving, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
For sure. And for our listeners who are thinking about becoming Airbnb hosts,
Yes.
I encourage you to take this knowledge, apply it to your own situation, and see if it's the right fit for you.
Good advice.
There's a lot of potential there,
There is.
but it's important to go in with your eyes wide open.
Well said. Remember, knowledge is power.
You got it.
The more you understand about how Airbnb works, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions that align with your goals.
Absolutely.
So do your research, weigh the pros and cons, and decide if hosting is the right move for you. Until next time, happy hosting.